Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The program will begin in a couple of minutes, so please move to your seats and help us start on schedule. As a reminder, please silence your electronic devices and leave them on so that you can text or email your questions for our guest speakers to the address on the screen, askmetna@gmail.com.
The Signal and Cyber Museum Society is on a mission to preserve the rich history and significant contributions of Americans who have and do serve at Fort Eisenhower in the Signal Regiment and the Army's Cyber Corps. Now, more than ever, we must save these stories to educate the public, train present-day soldiers, and inspire future generations. Your support is vital to preserve this 160-year-old history and prepare young Americans for service in the 21st century. Visit secureourstory.org to learn more and join us in keeping our nation's legacy. Together, we can ensure our history lives on.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please give your attention to a brief recognition. Today, high school and middle school students from around the Central Savannah River area put their cyber skills to the test in an exciting and challenging competition. We're proud to share that 26 teams participated, both in person and virtually, demonstrating enthusiasm, curiosity, and the growing talent in our future cyber workforce. We are grateful to the organizers and participants of today's event, and we would like to recognize the teachers, coaches, and mentors who support these students year-round. The winners of the middle school Capture the Flag are, in third place, Augusta Prep Cavaliers. In second place, the Gunners from Paul Knox Middle School. And the winning team was Sigma 2.0 from Paul Knox Middle School. Please give those teams a round of applause. And now let's recognize the winners of the high school Capture the Flag. Third place goes to the Weezers 2 from Augusta Prep. The second place team is Ram Upgrades from Greenbrier High School. And first place was Cyber Avengers 1 from Alliance Academy of Innovation. Please join me in congratulating all of today's winners. Thank you, and at this time, please welcome to the stage Colonel Mike Black, United States Air Force retired, Vice President for Defense, AFCEA International.
All right, good afternoon. All right, that was pretty good. I'll take that. I won't make you do a redo on that. It's first my pleasure to introduce the participants in our final keynote event for day 2 here at the Fireside Chat, where we're going to have Mark Pomerleau from DefenseScoop and Brandon Pugh, Principal Cyber Advisor for the Headquarters Department of the Army. Now, Mark is a senior reporter for DefenseScoop. He covers information warfare, cyber, electronic warfare, information operations, intelligence, influence, battlefield networks, and data. Mr. Pugh, in his role as the PCA, or Principal Cyber Advisor, is responsible for advising the Secretary of the Army and the Army Chief of Staff on all cyber matters, including issues of readiness, budget, capabilities, and strategy. Mr. Pugh also serves in the United States Army Reserve as a national security law professor at the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. Now, I did find out one interesting fact about Mr. Pugh. He has very good taste in shoes. We both have on the exact same pair of Cole Haan shoes today. I have about 35 pair. I'm not sure how many you have, Brandon, but 6. All right. But a wise choice in shoes for both of us. So please join me in welcoming Mark and Brandon to the stage.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out whoever's in charge for the music this week. Loving the Skinnerd on repeat here.
Totally.
But anyway, Mr. Pugh, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy day to share some insights with us here. I know that we're standing between everybody and a cold beverage, so we're going to do our best to work through that and get you guys off. But I think just to kick things off, the PCA position is still relatively new within the DoD, and so would love to hear your thoughts on how you're looking to shape that role in your tenure right now.
Totally. No, well, Mark, thanks for doing this. And Mark and I were, hopefully I don't put you in a spot, chatting beforehand. Mark and his wife have kids coming in, twins, like you said, in November. Yes. And I said, we have a 6-month, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a 6-month-old at home, so I can only relate to what you're getting into. But no, really an honor to be here, and thanks for doing this. This is I hate to admit, my first TechNet. Hopefully the first of many. AFCEA it's been a great program, but I've only been in the role. This is actually a day after my 8th week, so fairly new, but really excited to join the team. And people always ask, why did you join? Like, we always saw you at a think tank, and that's where I immediately came from. And I truly believe in the direction the Army's going. It's not just a talking point by our Secretary and our Chief of Staff. The Army's continuous transformation is really a unique window in really transforming the Army overall to the current battlefield as well as where the future one is. And I think cyber is a key part of that. I think cyber is in its own right is a unique capability, but also really enables all other tasks under Army continuous transformation. So that's really why I joined. I thought it was a neat opportunity to engage. But to your point, It is a new role. I'm asked every day, like, what do you actually do? Like, are you the CIO too? Are you the G6? And both great people, and I know they're in the room, but unique role. I mean, it's created in 2019 by Congress to really have, one person in a service that could kind of capture everything that's being done in cyber and advise our 2 senior leaders. I mean, Congress did give us 7 tasks. Like, it's very prescriptive if you haven't read it. Like, they basically write my job description in statute. They go as far to say the 5 people I have to meet with on a routine basis. And the unique responsibility I have outside of those 7 tasks is certifying the Army's budget. So really making sure our budget is adequate, and I do that on a yearly basis.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Outside of some of those statutory requirements, it does seem that to a degree there is a little bit of choose your own adventure in terms of what you can focus on and what your priorities are. And would love to hear what you're looking to do in this role and what some of the key items are on the docket for you to really get off and running on.
No, you're certainly right. So each branch, if you're not familiar, does have a PCA. The Navy has one. Air Force is the original PCA. Obviously, we're a little unique. I'm the first political appointee in the role. So President Trump appointed me on June 16th. And it very much is like, how are you the way I see my role is I'm here to support the Secretary as well as the Chief. So whatever is most helpful for them while meeting my 7 statutory tasks is what I'm here to do. As part of that, though, I want to be value add. I'm not looking to duplicate many of our great partners in the building and out of the building, support them, but then also go down several paths of our own. One of the big tasks in the Army Continuous Transformation is really delivering capabilities to the warfighter in a quick speed. That's just not a buzzword. How do I interpret that for our office? I am super passionate, and if anybody in the room knows me, I probably have mentioned this 100 times, is really looking at the nexus of AI and cyber. And our cyber is doing a great job under Al's leadership. But I think that's the direction we need to go in. I mean, what the CIO is doing is super important work, but it's really AI at the enterprise and business use case. How do we now push AI to the warfighter and actually get it out there? And I think cyber defense and offense is a prime application. I'm happy to elaborate on that. I would say another one is President Trump's priority is really defending the homeland. And I think the Army has a unique role to play there, is really making sure domestic critical infrastructure is protected. After all, most of our bases rely on private critical infrastructure. I know you've looked into that. I think a third aspect, and I could go on really forever, is leaning into our budget certification and budget adequacy determination. So it's tempting, I think, to kind of just sign off at the last minute. I actually think that is a unique lever our office can play. Not from a cost efficiency perspective, perhaps, but making sure it's actually adequate. If there are opportunities we need to invest, and I see that incumbent on me to go to our senior leaders and say, well, here are a couple areas that, if additional funding would help, especially if there's a nexus to the warfighter or making us prepared for the future battlefield. After all, Secretary Hegseth did direct the Secretary of the Army to invest in 5 areas. What was super cool to me is cyber is one of them. EW is another. 2 of the areas I care a lot about are now in the top 5 areas for our secretary to get after.
Yeah, I want to pull on your AI thread as well. Obviously, we've kind of gone from buzzword to reality on that in many senses. Are there other organizations or agencies across DoD or the federal government that you're looking to maybe coordinate or leverage in terms of AI, either for defense or offense?
100%. So, maybe as a broad point to begin with. So my role is only successful if we coordinate and make relationships with people. We're, fully staffed. We'll probably only be an 18 or 19 person office, which for those who know the Pentagon, for a 3-star equivalent office, that is a small team. But we have such incredible partners in the G6, CIO, with our cyber. So really staying on top of them. But to your specific point on AI and cyber, 100%. And the CDAO at the OSD level is thinking through AI at a high level, going through policies, providing resources. But to the unique application of cyber, I still think there's a lot to do. I think our cyber, admittedly, is probably one of the leaders out there looking at these applications. Still a lot of room that we can grow there. Cybercom is doing some. They've had their AI task force for, anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, I think coming on 18 months, 19 months. But I think there's a prime opportunity here. If you didn't read you probably did, but for those in the audience that haven't, if you haven't read the AI action plan that came out of the White House a couple weeks ago, it was really interesting to see that AI in cyber was specifically flagged. Mainly from a positive perspective, looking at that the way we can stay ahead of adversaries that largely outnumber us is leveraging AI and directing both the department as well as our interagency partners to really double down in their efforts. And I would say from an industry perspective, I know there's a lot of industry leaders in the room, I think the focus on like consumer applications of AI has actually been really good to security, because that has driven a lot of our private sector partners to really rethink their offerings, seeing how they can leverage AI, infuse AI, and continue to innovate. I mean, automated responses to cyber incidents 3 or 4 years ago was maybe like a concept for many, although now it's really cool to see a lot of vendors actually doing that.
Right, yeah. I really want to pick up on something else that you mentioned too, is this notion of bringing capability to the warfighter at the battlefield. And I think obviously you work for the secretary, but you mentioned that you're also trying to build relationships not only with the chief, but some of the staff directorates within the chief of staff's office. And so curious to hear how you're looking to maybe bridge that gap where cyber has sometimes been more of a back office IT or remote asset, not necessarily at the tip of the spear on the battlefield. How are you looking to maybe help build those relationships and really get cyber capabilities at the point of need?
Yeah, there's probably 2 myths that I hear a lot in cyber is that, and this isn't a knock on any senior leader, certainly not ours, but is that we can do something in cyber broadly speaking, instantaneously. If we want to do some sort of effect, it's just a matter of somebody going to click something in their keyboard. Perhaps in some applications, in others it takes a long time. That's one. I think the second is that it should be a standalone capability, that the capability only rests potentially with one command. I think it's really encouraging to see, especially with like our expeditionary cyber capabilities, how can we embed both EW and cyber capabilities with an infantry unit, with our special operations units. That's really neat. And to your point on the partnership, it's essential. For our office, we're not an execution arm. We have to rely on those that have the execution authority. We can provide policy and advice, but not execution. And a good example of that is working with the G357. That was something we really took to heart, and really my first week we were there, we're like, well, we want to meet with a lot of leaders there and see like, how can we work together? You can develop X words and orders. We can issue orders. A good example of this would be, as we think through the Army's cyber vision. My predecessor did an Army action plan. That's something we're working through now. We could write it and the secretary could sign it. And I think that would carry the weight. Obviously, the secretary is signing something out. I think a really effective partnership would be to say, okay, well, here's the vision. Now, G357 can task specific commands and specific elements, give them timelines, follow on, and make sure it's actually helping and driving and being part of the continuous transformation. So I think that's kind of like how I would see the relationship playing out. And I have to give him a shameless plug. Like General Kwan at the, in the 357 is a rock star, really understands this stuff. So he's been a great partner.
And a fellow reservist.
Yeah, I have to say, being a reservist, I love finding reservists and guardsmen in the building. Like, unassuming, you'll meet leaders and be like, well, I'm a guardsman as well. I'm like, no clue. I thought you were on active duty here.
Yeah.
Neat background. Partially why I'm maybe, always looking for opportunities to infuse the Guard and Reserve and cyber.
Right. I do want to touch on that, but to put a bow on this as well, obviously the Army has been moving out for several years on this notion of expeditionary cyber, and how do you see that playing out, and what role do you think you can help to play, whether it's a policy, authorities, budget certification, just helping to maybe clear some hurdles to be able to really realize these capabilities at the tactical edge and provide our forces with a force multiplier?
Yeah, so I mentioned Al's work on AI. I would say the other thing that I'm probably a champion for at the Pentagon is what General Barrett's 11th Cyber Battalion is doing. It's remarkable. I sell that as a success story and one that we should really expand and perhaps even duplicate. I can confidently say, in terms of service capabilities, we're probably tied for being the best in expeditionary cyber right now. Perhaps even better. Maybe putting my Army bias on, I'll give us the win. But no, in all seriousness, I think that's the type of capability, making sure we're infusing cyber in conflict and potentially in an operational unit of where we should get to. As I'm speaking to a room of experts, many of you know this better than me, is there are certain capabilities that we need, proximate access for that we can't do thousands of miles away. Looking at that, especially in the EW context, I know the chief is really passionate about EW, and the G6 has been doing a lot of important work on that. How do we put those capabilities into, in an operational unit? And I see how our role plays a role. I think it's raising awareness, especially in the secretariat side, making it known that these are capabilities that should be infused across the operational force. And from a budgetary perspective, making sure they're resourced. Part of the initial, endeavors when the secretary first came in was looking through efficiencies and realizing that perhaps we can cease procurement in certain capabilities but reinvest that in other capabilities that a future battlefield may need. Just personally speaking, I see that being a prime example.
Sure. Yeah, I really want to touch on this notion of leveraging the Guard and Reserve. I mean, I can't tell you how many forums I go to where everybody says we need to leverage the Guard and Reserve more, Compo 2 and 3, and it just keeps coming up and coming up. I know Congress is looking at this right now in the NDAA to try to increase Guard participation in cyber, especially in the Cyber Mission Force or U.S. Cyber Command. But would love to hear your thoughts on how you see yourself playing a role in terms of really making that a reality and getting more of that Guard and Reserve capability integrated into the cyber enterprise.
Great question. I promise, Mark, that I did not pre-coordinate in all my priorities in advance, but I would say I'll add this to the list of things that we're really passionate about in our office. I see this as as a total army. We need our active duty soldiers, but we also need our reservists and our guardsmen, and I'll add civilians on top of that. That's a separate conversation, but also super important. I think we see awesome examples of the Guard and Reserve being utilized. The question I ask myself is how can we amplify that? How can we make sure that Guard and Reserve are being fully infused in our capabilities, both defense and offense, outside of just one-off mobilizations? It's great to bring reservists to Cyber Command as for a mobilization for a year or half a year. Is there an opportunity to really utilize these units even during their drill weekends? That way we get away from just doing basic soldier skills in a drill weekend, like your PHAs, your shooting, all essential, like we're still soldiers at the end of the day, but doing what you were trained to do on your reserve weekend. And I think there's examples out there, some in the Army, some in the Air Force. So there are models. So what I've asked my team to really think through and research is what are the barriers to fully leveraging? If it comes down to money, and not naive, many things come down to money, well, that's good to know. What is that appetite? And that's something, when we do Hill engagement, we're really trying to increase our Hill engagement. We have tangible figures of what it would take. Even if it's a pilot program, perhaps we get a unique funding stream to do that. Because I am not naive to the fact that we have limited money, and the Guard and Reserve, that would take money. But I think it's an incredible thing for us to really get after and utilize them. To your point on General Kwan earlier, some of these Reserve and Guardsmen have incredible skill sets. Like they're in C-suite positions sometimes in their civilian world. To make sure we're leveraging them, I think is key. And that's something we've done even outside of cyber. We've had a direct commissioning program for cyber. We have a relatively new direct commissioning program for awesome tech execs. So there are efforts underway. My question is just, how do we make those even more pervasive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and relatedly, back to your point about homeland defense and critical infrastructure and operational technology, that seems very ripe for Guard participation. I'll give a plug for my home region of New England, the Cyber Yankee exercise that happens every year. That seems like a great opportunity to possibly leverage, the expertise that is resident within those folks.
100%. I'm in New Jersey, so love the example from a New England example. No, but you're right. There's a lot of reasons I think to use the Guard and Reserve. I think getting after critical infrastructure vulnerabilities as well as our OT vulnerabilities is a good example. Not to sound too much like an attorney, but one is a realistic legal consideration. Is the Guard can utilize unique legal authorities to get after some of these risks. They also know their communities by and large very well. Some of them work in the very private critical infrastructure operators that we're trying to help. They work there in their day job. So those are unique benefits. But I will say the issue of defense critical infrastructure is broader. And I know that ties into our effort to defend the homeland. It is a challenge, especially considering so many of these critical infrastructure operators are privately owned. So, we can do a really good job of defending our bases and what's on our base, but what happens when we're outside the wire? How do we go after them? And I think in the short term, that really does take a whole government approach, working with our partners at CISA, working with some of the interagency, whether it be the Department of Energy, is just one example. And I do think, I wouldn't be surprised if we see moving forward, there is a coordinated effort on that front.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Another big topic right now is obviously the generation of cyber forces, right? There's obviously a retention problem across the whole of society, which the military isn't spared from that. And so How are you thinking about how the Army in particular can generate forces, whether it's on the active duty uniform side or even possibly the civilian side as well?
Yep. I mean, you tee up both aspects of this. I mean, I think there's unique considerations for our military members as well as our civilians. I think we've made great strides in the civilian front, not to say there's always room for improvement. What we've done with the Cyber Expected Service program, I think is great. But continuing to lean into that, especially making sure that there's consideration of the CES positions when we do hiring freezes, which there has been. There has been some exemptions for certain CES positions during the hiring freezes. I think that's important. But looking at how do we initially draw civilians and retain them? I think the same thing in the military front. And I know our signal and cyber cores have done a good job at this. As simple as looking at through PCS cycles. What does an incentive program look like? How do we work through different levels of mastery? I think those are all super important concepts. And truthfully, our office ultimately goes back to the man, train, and equip function. So thinking through our office, how do we support those efforts and make sure what we're feeding up the cyber command, as well as retaining at the our cyber level, is adequate, and actually more than adequate, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know that the civilian aspect is really important, right? Those are folks that don't PCS, right? They have the resident expertise that can just, stay in their work role. And so I know that, yeah, you mentioned a few unique authorities. And so, yeah, it seems like a really important aspect to let people know. I know U.S. Cyber Command has been on an educational campaign to try to go into high schools and colleges and let people know, you don't necessarily have to put on a uniform to serve.
100%. I'm not naive to the fact that, I have friends that go into industry, and I don't fault them for it. But I will say, it's a shameless plug, which I think many of us in the room probably first served for, was like the mission you have, regardless of what entity in cyber and the military you work for, is just so unique. And the exposure and the experience you're going to get so early on is much different than where I'd say my friends in industry are seeing. I think they have an important role, but I would say like the actual mission-oriented nature of what we're doing on a daily basis is key. I mean, that's why I came back here as a civilian. I loved my previous job, but the opportunity to protect our nation from adversaries, and largely doing so on a daily basis, many of our cyber soldiers and signal soldiers, that's something you're just not going to see in industry.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned at the top the Army continuous transformation. Obviously a huge focus for the service right now. You did mention a few examples, but curious if you can expand a little bit on how you see cyber playing into that and how you can maybe help discover some efficiencies within that larger effort.
Totally. Yeah, I would say on the continuous transformation, efficiencies is definitely a part of it. I'd say the overarching goal, there's several efforts under it, is really making sure we're prepared for that future battlefield. And I think that's why you see the Secretary routinely focusing on different types of technologies, some which we have now, building upon them, and I think cyber is a key element of that. I think really all the efforts under continuous transformation, maybe somebody can prove me wrong in the audience, all of them have some sort of cyber considerations. Take even our quest for UAS. What are the cyber, how are we defending our own UAS capabilities? And then when we speak about counter UAS, how does cyber play in there? I'd be really hard pressed to find a way that cyber is not relevant in everything we're doing. Grant, you're speaking to the PCA, so obviously I have an interest in saying that, but I do think it's a reality. But I also think it's important to really keep in mind, how is cyber still a standalone capability? When we're looking at defense of the homeland, going after adversaries, it is a standalone capability, and one of which we should be infusing with others. Mm-hmm. So I really think it's kind of twofold there. I can say, sitting here after 8 weeks, it's been really encouraging to see how much cyber and tech is really cared about at the Pentagon.
Yeah. I always hear the phrase that cyber is the ultimate team sport, and so I'm curious how you might be working with or talking to your counterparts in the other services as well.
Yep, it is. I would say, sometimes it feels like, and I don't say this, it seems like I'm a professional meeting attendee sometimes. It's no exaggeration. Sometimes I'm in 14 hours of meeting a day, but that's actually great. I think that is what I want. I want people to be asking for opinion, giving us a seat at the table. I should be out there proactively speaking with the Navy PCA, the Air Force PCA, and our interagency. That is how I see my role. It would be bad if I just kind of sat in my office and just, did inward research projects, kind of like what I did at a think tank, not to diminish my past work. So we are. The other PCAs and I have routine touch points. Some are formal. We meet monthly. Some are informal. I'll routinely call them just saying, how is your service addressing a particular problem? What are your unique considerations? Realizing that cyber in the Army, There's a lot of differences sometimes, cyber and the Air Force. Obviously similarities. So I think it's very helpful. And one relationship we lean heavily into is with our ASD for cyber policy, so the Assistant Secretary of Defense for cyber policy. So while I advise Secretary Driscoll, Ms. Buckout, who's the acting ASD, is advising Secretary Hegseth. There's a very healthy tension there, especially considering they're working issues that are very close to cybercom, but would have direct impacts to the services. So I think that's really incumbent on me to engage during that process to make sure the outcome, obviously supporting our overall goal in cyber, but is in favor of the Army, I would say, at the end, and I wouldn't want something inadvertently to negatively impact the Army. Mm-hmm. And me engaging those processes and staying in touch with our partners at the Pentagon and outside the Pentagon is key. I know I bother probably, not to put them on the spot, but probably the G6 and our cyber about some question several times a week. But I think it's key, because what they're seeing on a daily basis is a lot different than my vantage point sometimes. That's truly why it is a team sport.
Right. Well, I'd love to turn it over. We really want to make this a two-way street here, and would love to welcome any conversation or any questions that anyone from the audience has as well. I think.
Thank you. We do have a couple of audience questions here. To start with, how do you align the Army cyber budget to maximize effectiveness for what U.S. Cybercom receives for enhanced budget versus what the Army-aligned cyber elements receive, including Compo 2 and 3?
Yeah, good question. I think the budget question is one worth spending I don't know who to look at depending on the question, but I think this could be its own panel, to be honest, and I'm not saying that to dodge a thorough answer, but it really could be, and one we're putting a lot of time in. The budget historically has not been, I would say maybe not as big of a priority as some of my predecessors in the office, and that's not a knock on them. They did great work. I'd say one that's very close to us, and I think it's very timely, especially as Cyber Command continues to go through different iterations of transformation. The budget and acquisition authority is a key part of that. So for me, it's making sure that we have the appropriate amount of funding that is still resting with the Army. And if there's a need for more, for me to be able to know that and advocate for that. I will say the part that I certify is obviously no surprise, is much smaller than Cyber Command. My budget certification authorities, depending on how you read it, currently I certify everything that has a cyber operations nexus, which is much smaller than our overall IT spend, and then much smaller than what Cybercom does. So I would say it's an open question now, as different iterations of Cyber Command are always being thought of, but something we're very engaged with. But yeah, so I would say that's kind of a short answer to what probably should be its own panel.
Okay, thank you, sir. Next, you mentioned securing the homeland as a priority, and apologies, this is a long question. With the risk to Army force generation and modernization from the range of SCADA and OT, what is your role in providing oversight to ensure continuity and unity of effort to secure operational technology while the roles and functions are redistributed during the Army staff reorganization and realignment of related roles and functions?
It's a fair question. So our office originally wrote the OT memo, which I see OT as being a smaller portion of overall critical infrastructure. We initially wrote that before it was signed. So that came from our office, was staffed through our office, so it's been something we've been very engaged with. All that to say is there are a lot of people in the Army that have some equity when it comes to both OT and critical infrastructure. And I think we're doing a really good job of that coordination. Could there be room for improvement? Probably, because it is a big issue, and rightfully so. Everybody has a perspective. What we see doing, the Corps of Engineers has an equity here, a 357, the G6, there's a lot of different equities there. So I think, how we've kind of helped connect the dots so far, sometimes I'll throw a conversation here about something they're doing in OT and making sure they're having synergy with another partner across the Army, making sure they're tracking their effort. So, I mean, some of these changes are fairly new, even the memo being signed, I believe, back in December. Don't quote me to that. So, it's kind of real time. I do think all that to say is it really is a priority. I think it must be. Our threats from adversaries to our critical infrastructure continue to expand and continue to grow, and one that we would see directly. I mean, going back to 2018, I believe it was, I was involved with the Army Cyber Institute's Jack Voltaic program, and even that being 7 years ago, the very purpose of that program was to look at threats to critical infrastructure and say, if we had an attack to OT or to a critical infrastructure operator, how would that impact force projection? We would do 2 US cities per year. The last iteration was Charleston and Savannah. And to no surprise, we found some startling things. We found that there could be a risk to force projection. This is all unclassified. If you haven't read them, shameless plug for ACI, the reports are great. But I can say even 7 years later, it is still a priority for the Army and must be. These threats, unfortunately, are not going away. We just need to stay ahead of the adversary and make sure our internal coordination is exceptional.
Thank you. Can you share any thoughts, if you have a view, on creating a cyber force similar to Space Force instead of, service by service?
Yeah, I perhaps have some personal thoughts, which I hate to not answer your question, but I would just say, I'm very well aware of the news that this is talked about. We've seen a lot of engagements outside the Army through think tanks. We've seen a lot of conversation over the years through the military. So I don't have a particular opinion on whether we should have a cyber force or not. I would say if that's the decision of the president, then I think it's really important for us to obviously support that decision. What I will say is, regardless of the force structure, it remains that we need to be thinking through some of these hard questions in terms of making sure there's coordination between the services, that our man training equipment function has some degree of coordination across the services. So whether that's a force or not, some of these tasks I think are relevant, because ultimately our goal should be to make sure we're getting the best trained people, regardless of branch, to Cyber Command. And I think there has been a lot of coordinating. I mean, as everybody in the room knows, we've seen efforts at unified training standards. We've seen, to our previous question around enhanced budget control, we've seen acquisition authorities go to Cyber Command. Those have all helped. So I hate to not give you a direct answer, but I would say it's, kind of live if you haven't been following the news recently.
Thank you. The next question. As the Army moves forward in increasing the resilience and cybersecurity of its critical infrastructure, including that which is operated or provided by the private sector, do you have any thoughts on how the public-private sector partnerships may need to change going forward?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think at a high level, our public-private partnerships is paramount. This is my personal view. I mean, the Army has to rely on our industry partners. There has to be a healthy relationship there, and I think there largely is, but that can always has to be long-standing and something that can grow. I think critical infrastructure is a really good example of that, kind of like what we were getting at earlier. When the Army does not own and control a lot of the critical infrastructure, and that's by private sector entities, there has to be a degree of coordination with them. And preferably before there's actually a need to have that coordination. A good example of that is we've seen really good examples where there's been exercises between private critical infrastructure and government entities, whether it be the DoD or not. They've happened well in advance of there being an incident or perhaps a vulnerability. Those are what we should be doing well in advance. And CISA, to their credit, has been doing some of that work. And I think, especially when the new director's coming online, I think that'll remain something he's considering. So all that to say is I think at the end of the day, it has to happen, that public-private partnership model.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question today. Can you expand more on ideas about how industry might better integrate into the Army to help with both capabilities and requirements? Do we need new policies?
So new policies, that's, I think we see offices at the Pentagon doing a great job with this, even those outside the Pentagon. I mean, it's something our office is doing. Granted, maybe it could be, in fairness to the question, done in a more routine process, and maybe there could be more of a routine way to do it, at least speaking for my office, not for others at the Pentagon. We love having industry partners come in. I think it's an opportunity for us to learn about what are the new inventions that industry is doing that perhaps we're not already doing in the military, and seeing how we can bring them in. I think there's a lot industry has already solved that perhaps can benefit the DoD. And my feeling always is if there's there's sometimes a need for a unique DoD product, but if industry has addressed a problem, perhaps we can acquire that and fine tune it for a DoD need rather than starting from scratch. And I think that's the thought around some of our acquisition reforms in the Army. But that's something for any industry partner in the room, not to volunteer us with a ton of meetings. We love hearing about what you're doing. I can confidently say there's very few AI companies that are engaged in the cyberspace that I have not talked to. I know you're probably sitting in the room saying, we haven't met with me, so do flag us after this, because I think it's super important. And that's something we've collaborated with their other PCAs on. They're routinely doing industry engagement, and sometimes we'll sit in their engagements, and sometimes we'll invite them to ours. And I have to say, this is also something that my boss, the secretary, is very engaged on, and he comes from a business background, was at a VC firm for a long time, so I think it really starts at the top and making sure there is a healthy partnership between the Army and industry, as there should be.
Thank you, sir. That was our final question. Please welcome Mike Black back to the stage.
All right. I want to say thank you, Mr. Pomerleau and Mr. Pugh, for joining us today for this engaging discussion. And Mr. Pomerleau, not to leave you out, I appreciate your fashion as well. I love that plaid suit and the boots that you got on as well.
That's what I said to him when I saw him. Like,
Yeah.
that suit is, I wish I had that fashion.
All right. We learned that cyber is in everything that we touch. Talked about amplifying the role of the Guard and Reserve and what they contribute. Understand that that at least 2 of your areas are in the top 5 priorities for the Secretary, so you know that what you do is important. In lieu of a gift, a speaker gift, AFCEA will make a donation to the Signal Cyber Museum Society on your behalf. What I'd like to do real quick is just highlight additional upcoming events that AFCEA has. On the 18th and 19th of September, the Intelligence and National Security Summit at the Gaylord at the National Harbor. The 2025 Education Foundation Golf Tournament for AFCEA is the 29th of September. That's at the Army-Navy Club there in Arlington. And then we have TechNet Indo-Pacific at the end of October, the 28th through the 30th in Hawaii, where we're going to be focusing on the Indo-Pacific AOR. For more information about these or any events, you can certainly just go to afcea.org and see that. Tomorrow, we're going to start right back up at 8 a.m. in this room with a keynote that's entitled Sustaining the Advantage Through Continuous Transformation. And that's by Joe Welch, the Deputy to the Commanding General at Army Futures Command. So thank you for engaging us on this second day where we're approaching our record numbers of attendance. I think we have exceeded our registrants number, and we're pretty close to the actual printed badges. So I just want to say thank everyone for your continued support. Enjoy your evening.